How do you become an alchemist? This is what a 16th century book suggests. Never work with any run masters. Use sturdy and well-crafted equipment made of terracotta or glass. Make sure to keep your work secret. Regulate the fire often and carefully. Always have your tools at hand, especially tongs. Deny your expertise in alchemy should anyone ask about it, and do not allow anyone into your workshop. Learn about the materials used in these operations, especially metals such as gold and silver. Do not teach the art to anyone, because revealing the secret of something causes it to lose its efficacy. Find a trusted and faithful servant, yet never leave them alone in your workshop. When you succeed in your experiment, thank God and give charitably to the poor. This advice is said to come from a woman. It's from The Secrets of the Lady Isabella Cortese, published in Venice in 1561. But what does this book, and the mysterious writer to whom it's attributed, tell us about women, science, alchemy, authorship, authority, and expertise in the Renaissance? Let's talk about the elusive Isabella Cortese and what her role as a professor of secrets can tell us about gender and knowledge in the Renaissance. Hello lovely history fans, I'm Dr. Julia Martins and I'm a historian. Welcome to Living History, where I talk about all things to do with the history of medicine, gender, alchemy, and much more. If you're new here, welcome. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you know when a new video is out. I also have a Patreon, and it would be great if you considered supporting my work there and helping me make more history videos like this one. Speaking of which, I'm so excited to share this video with you. I first started studying this topic over a decade ago, and I'm so passionate about it, which is why the video is quite long. But stick with me, I promise you that Isabella Cortese deserves it. So, let's get into it. So who was Isabella Cortese? Well, the short answer is we don't really know, but that's okay. The fact that we can't be sure is itself interesting, I promise, and it tells us a lot about what was happening in this period. Let me explain. So, in 1585, a Dominican friar called Tommaso Garzoni wrote a book listing over 500 professions. All the professions of the world, he wrote, the piazza universale di tutte le professioni del mondo. You could find all the usual occupations, of course, tailors, cooks, craftsmen, but there was also something new, professors of secrets. Garzoni described them as people who sought out things whose reasons are not so clear that they might be known by everyone, but by their very nature are manifested only to a very few. Nevertheless, they contain certain seeds of discovery, which facilitate finding out the way toward discovering whatever the intellect may desire to know. So, these professors of secrets were people interested in the wonders and secrets of nature, the occult, hidden virtues and properties of natural things, and how to manipulate them, often using alchemy, to make things like remedies and cosmetics. But you might be thinking, why professors? Well, because they were literally professing these secrets, teaching them, especially in printed books of secrets, which contained many of these recipes and which were a best-selling genre in 16th century Italy and beyond. They were on the margins of academic culture, professors of secrets, and the learned world. So, who were these people? Well, Garzoni listed many of them, including the best-selling Alessio Piemontese and Leonardo Fioravanti, and if you're interested in this fabulous Bolognese surgeon who was often accused of being a charlatan, I suggest you check out my video on him. Anyway, among the list of men, one single female name stands out, Isabella Cortese, a professoressa of secrets, who was the only woman in the list. Now, women practicing alchemy was not unusual, especially those from wealthy families, nor was it unusual for them to create manuscript collections of this kind of recipe. I made a video about Caterina Sforza a while back, and she's perhaps the best example of a female secretista. Go check out that video if you're interested. But I just wanted to highlight the close relationship between Caterina and her assistant, Luigi Ciocchi, a loyal and discreet servant, and how similar that is to Isabella's description that I started the video with. But anyway, what was unusual, though, was for these collections to be available in print. And Cortese's book was a big hit. There were 7 editions between its first publication in 1561 and 1599, and the collection was translated into German and reprinted twice. But who was she? Well, unfortunately, very little is known about her. In fact, the main source we have is her own book, in which she describes herself as a noblewoman, possibly from Venice, who had traveled extensively throughout Central and Eastern Europe, looking to learn all about alchemy and perfumes, which are the main subjects of her recipes. She dedicated the book, her only known work, to her brother, the Archdeacon of Ragusa, Mario Caboda. Contrary to her, even though he was just as interested in alchemy, he hadn't been very successful in his pursuit of this great art. Enter Isabella Cortese, ready to teach her brother and all of her readers all about it. Now, historians have been debating her identity for centuries. Who was the person behind the name? Did Isabella exist, or was she a pseudonym? And if so, was it really a woman behind the name? I mean, I don't want to bore you too much with this debate, but here's a summary. The first possibility is that there really existed someone called Isabella Cortese. One historian described her as a learned and successful woman of an uncertain fate. I mean, this is such a tempting hypothesis. I understand why we would really want it to be true. And there was indeed a Cortese family in Modena, and another one in Rome, and their descendants migrated, like the poet Giulio Cesare Cortese, who was born in Naples. However, I couldn't find any records of a woman called Isabella in the archives that matched the period in which the book was published. One possible clue is a document called a privilegio a stampa found in Venice, which is essentially when someone asks to be the only one allowed to print a specific book. In this case, a publisher and bookseller called Curtio Traiano was granted the privilege to be the only one to print both Timoteo Rossello's and Isabella Cortese's book, and he was brother-in-law to Giovanni Bariletto, who ended up publishing both books. Some historians say that if there's one thing we can trust is the Venetian bureaucracy, and so its officials would have investigated this case thoroughly, which would indicate that Cortese was a real person. I'm personally not persuaded by this argument. Another possibility, which 18th and 19th century historians already believed in, was that she was a pseudonym created by the publisher. But why would they choose a female name? This, to me, is more interesting than the question of her identity. Let me give you some context. So, there are many similarities between Isabella's book and those of her contemporaries, such as Alessio Piemontese, but especially Timoteo Rossello. And both of these authors were very likely pseudonyms too, possibly created by a man called Girolamo Ruscelli, a polygrapho, or a tradesman of the pen, so a professional writer and editor, essentially. All these books contained the same kind of recipes, and Ruscelli even later published another volume under his own name in 1567. Borrowing from other books was extremely common in a period in which copyright law was virtually non-existent, and publishing under pseudonyms was commonplace as well. Just to give you an idea, both Cortese's and Rossello's books were published in the same year, 1561, by the same publisher in Venice, Giovanni Bariletto. They were also both dedicated to the same person, Mario Caboda, the Archdeacon of Ragusa, which had once been under the control of Venice. Caboda was an avid, if perhaps frustrated, alchemist. He taught at the University of Padua, a center of international academic exchange, and he was a member of the Accademia dei Confusi in Viterbo. By the way, that's where Ruscelli was from. So what if Caboda had met Ruscelli through these connections? To make things more complicated, remember that Cortese writes that Caboda was her brother, and his Slavic name was Cordisa, which does sound similar to Cortese. What if he was the one behind the recipes, perhaps along with Ruscelli? Later, when Ruscelli published his own book, it started with the same recipe as Cortese's book. And it's also intriguing that just as quickly as they appeared on the market, the names of both Rossello and Cortese disappeared. Nothing more is heard of them. Alessio Piemontese, on the other hand, became the ultimate best-selling book of this kind, and many people believe that Ruscelli was the person behind this character too. He even said this in his own book, that he had created Alessio Piemontese. So, maybe Ruscelli, probably collaborating with other people such as publishers, created 3 different authors for 3 different collections of recipes, and seeing which one of them did better in the market, dropped the other 2. Another clue here is the same 16th century text about professors of secrets that I quoted earlier, in which Garzoni listed Don Alessio Piemontese, that blasphemous Agrippa von Nettesheim, Girolamo Ruscelli, Isabella Cortese, whose name is believed to be false along with Don Alessio's by Ruscelli. That's excessively harsh on Agrippa, perhaps, but anyway, Garzoni believed Cortese and Piemontese to be editorial inventions, and I tend to agree. Unfortunately, all we can do is give it our best educated guess. Who knows, maybe one day we'll find a new document hidden somewhere in the archives and know more. Still, intriguing as this investigation is, and I mean, at least to me it is, it's not what I find the most interesting thing about Isabella Cortese. I mean, let's talk about the book itself and why it would have been attributed to a woman in the first place. What does that mean in terms of the relationship between women and knowledge in this period? So, if we accept the premise that Isabella Cortese was an editorial name, that begs the question, why choose a female name as the author of a recipe book on alchemy? I mean, just think of all the female writers of the past who have done the opposite. George Eliot, Isaac Dinesen, George Sand were all male pseudonyms for women, or the Bronte sisters who chose gender-neutral names, Acton, Currer, and Alice Bell. Let's think of the name itself. Cortese is an anagram for secreto, as many historians have pointed out, and maybe there's something to it, even though it feels very Nicolas Cage in that irresistibly silly film, National Treasure. But Cortese also literally translates as courtly. It makes you think of an aristocratic courtly lady, and this was in a time in which alchemists were in high demand in Italian courts, and many members of the nobility, men and women, had their own laboratories. It calls to mind Caterina Sforza, and by this association, the book gains in authenticity, but also authority. Still thinking of the name, Isabella is also evocative of Isabella d'Este, the famous patron of the arts, but also a well-known alchemist, and secretista herself, famous for her unique perfumes. Secretive attitudes were still very closely associated with alchemy and with these female alchemists. So, a book promising to reveal the secrets of a great lady, whose name evocated all these associations, a text aimed at women, would be a clever choice. It would make commercial sense. The publication of this book, under Cortese's name, indicates that 16th century publishers recognized there would be an interest among their readers in a book written by a woman, in which she shared her knowledge and experience in alchemical matters. And although the book could be useful to both men and women, it was marketed to women. It was meant for every great lady. Although many women alchemists, like Caterina Sforza and Isabella d'Este, compiled manuscript collections of recipes, none of them were available in print. One of the things that made their recipes so valuable was the very fact that they were secret and unavailable to most people. But this was quickly changing. There was an increased move away from secrecy and towards sharing knowledge, in no small measure thanks to the impact of the printing press. Alessio Piemontese had become famous in part because he had declared that knowledge should be shared openly. In his book, he had written how he had always guarded his secret recipes jealously. Once, he had even declined to share a recipe with a physician whose patient had subsequently died. This provoked an epiphany in the author, or so the story goes. Cortese tells us little in her book about her own life, but there's a similar story. When she was living abroad, she met a priest on his way to Krakow, who was carrying secret letters to a Polish humanist and scholar. Now, unfortunately for him, but fortunately for Isabella, the priest fell ill and died on the way. Cortese found that these letters were full of precious alchemical secrets, which she included in her book, attributing them to Father Benedetto of Vienna. This story evokes some alchemical themes, such as learning secret knowledge from a master and the idea of revelation, but just as in Piemontese's case, Cortese chooses openness over secrecy. She publishes the content of these letters in her book. Of course, in both cases, these are probably made-up stories, but they illustrate this move towards openness and accessibility where alchemical knowledge is concerned. Moreover, there's a shift from an allegorical and hermetic writing style to a practical, matter-of-fact, technical way of teaching readers. The ethics behind accessibility to knowledge and openness were being debated by humanists who were discussing basically who should be allowed to know what. This made sense at a time in which books were increasingly being published in the vernacular languages rather than Latin, and literacy was spreading quickly. So, more people would have access to this kind of knowledge than ever before. Someone like Girolamo Ruscelli, who was a professional writer and editor, would know the tastes of his reading public, especially if he was indeed the person behind The Secrets of Alessio Piemontese, which was just a few years earlier. So, maybe a professoressa of secrets was invented to fill a void in the market and to move away from the secrecy exemplified by Caterina Sforza and Isabella d'Este. But there's more to it than that. There are some fundamental differences between the other recipe books of the time and Cortese's. Timoteo Rossello's secrets, which are dedicated to men and women of great intelligence, are respectful, not to say reverential, of the past and ancient authorities, especially the great alchemists. Rossello's book is full of explanations and descriptions. Cortese's book is much more direct. Rossello's directions are vaguer and more abstract. Cortese's are precise. Isabella Cortese, as I said at the beginning of this video, urges her readers to drop the study of these great masters completely. Her work is a break with tradition in more ways than one. For her, practical experience shouldn't just complement book learning, it should replace it altogether. Maybe using a female name for this book would allow for such a rupture, more than a man's, without losing authority. In fact, authority is created by doing just that. So what if this was another reason why a female name was chosen for the book? Let's go back to Cortese's advice on how to become an alchemist. This is what she wrote. I tell you, dearest brother, if you want to follow the art of alchemy and to operate in it, it is not necessary to follow the works of Geber, nor of Ramon Lull, nor Arnaldo Villanova, nor any of the other philosophers, because they have not recorded anything truthful in their books, but only fictions and riddles. I have studied these books for more than 30 years and have never found anything good in them. I wasted time and almost lost my life and all of my possessions. And because, dearest brother, I know that you have wasted a lot of time and spent much money, out of compassion for you, I beg you not to lose any more time on these books by the philosophers. Just follow the rules I write down for you. Do not increase or diminish anything, but do what I say and write and follow my commandments written below. Cortese is openly contemptuous of the great masters and alchemical theory. She advises against reading them to learn alchemy and the secrets of nature. Now, she wasn't the only one to believe that at the time, but there was a gendered aspect to this. For instance, traveling and learning from practical experience from all kinds of people was increasingly lauded as superior to the study done at universities, at least by those writing popular books. This is what Alessio Piemontese wrote. I have traveled the world for 57 years to know learned people of all sorts, and naturally I have acquired many beautiful secrets, not only from great learned men and great nobles, but also from poor little women, from craftsmen, from peasants, and from all kinds of people. Now, listen to what Leonardo Fioravanti, another professor of secrets, wrote. Many years have passed since I left my sweet home, Bologna, solely with the goal of traveling around the world to gain knowledge of natural philosophy, so that I might practice medicine and surgery better than I could when I began my work. I always looked for precious experiments, whether from learned physicians or simple empirics, from all kinds of people, peasants, shepherds, soldiers, clerics, simple women, and people of all sorts. Both Piemontese and Fioravanti considered women valid sources of knowledge, even if they are slightly condescending in how they describe them. They are referring here, of course, not to women like Isabella Cortese or Caterina Sforza, but rather to illiterate herb women, midwives, wise women, and matrons living in the countryside. Contrary to Cortese, they hadn't studied all the authorities before rejecting them, nor traveled far and wide. They didn't have access to that. But they had amassed knowledge through their roles in their families and communities. Fioravanti was a surgeon as well as an experimenter, and he wrote how sometimes physicians would be baffled by a case, and then some experienced old woman will appear, and with the rules of life and an enema will make the fever stop, and with an unction will make the pain disappear, or with some fomentation will make the patient sleep. In so doing, the old woman will know more than the physician. So, even simple country women, because their knowledge came primarily from experience rather than theory, could have the upper hand. In many of these popular recipe books, women are credited with miraculous formulas, even if they're not usually named, which is very frustrating. So, in the debate about authority and expertise, the knowledge women had acquired through practice was often used to make the point that direct experience had value. And if women tended to be associated with praxis, men were associated with theory. Of course, this is a false binary and an oversimplification. Cortese herself tells us that she spent decades studying alchemical books. But recipe books were at the core of a discussion about knowledge and its value. These books tended to prioritize practice over study and trial and error over book learning, often relying on women to make this very point. Isabella Cortese's book is the best example of just that. And because these books were focused on practical applications of alchemy rather than its abstract mysticism, it's possible that publishing a book under a female name would highlight this trend. Later, with the spread of Paracelsianism, this pragmatic alchemy would gain even more traction. And if on one end of the social spectrum you would find a poor country woman, at the other end there were highly learned women like Caterina Sforza with their formulas for the Philosopher's Stone. But some less extraordinary women were also interested in learning about these subjects too. Knowledge about medical and cosmetic recipes, which often relied on alchemical methods, was spreading in this period among women, especially in cities like Venice. Perhaps a recipe book attributed to a woman would be able to encapsulate both the experience learned from practice that women had, from taking care of their neighbors, when they were giving birth, making soap at home, that kind of thing, as well as the more aristocratic and refined pursuits of female alchemists of the Renaissance. Maybe a book like Cortese's could encapsulate female knowledge at both ends of the spectrum and capitalize on what readers, especially female readers, might want to learn from a female secretista. It's likely that the publisher thought that the author's name would increase sales, combining this female authority and expertise gained through practice and experience, and highlighting to women that this was a book meant specifically for them. So, if you're still with me, you might be wondering, but what was inside this book anyway? Now, take a look at this book. This is a 1619 copy I bought when I was studying in Italy many years ago. And you can tell that it's small and unpretentious, it's an octavo, and it could easily fit in your pocket. It's been cheaply printed. There are a few illustrations, just a couple of woodcuts, depicting instruments you may need to follow the formulas in the book. Although the book was meant for every great lady, male readers would find many useful recipes here too. Cortese's recipes were meant for people sufficiently well off, such as to have the time and the resources to pursue them, and it was expected that readers would already possess the necessary tools and skills to follow these recipes. They were meant for the elite. Her collection was composed of 4 parts, or books. The first and shortest, with only 30 recipes, dealt with medicine, so things like remedies for the plague and syphilis, antidotes to poisons, and formulas for recovering after childbirth. And many of these recipes relied on alchemical operations such as distillation, multiplication, and transmutation. The second part, which was composed of 70 recipes, was alchemy in a strict sense, so recipes for elixirs, the Philosopher's Stone, and how to make gold. This is a section that had come from the priest that I mentioned earlier, according to Cortese, but the instructions are clear and accessible. The third book, with 99 recipes, focuses on marvelous or wonderful secrets, which tend to involve a transformation of some sort. So things like how to make mirrors or create gold ink for illuminating manuscripts, but also more mundane concerns such as removing stains from fabrics and even curing male impotence. As always, please don't try this at home, but this is what that recipe looks like. To straighten out the male member: testicles of quail, oil from the inner bark of storax and from the elder tree, large winged ants, musk and amber from the orient. Just mix this together and apply as needed. Yikes. Doesn't that sound delightful? Anyway, the last and longest part of the book, with 221 recipes, is concerned with cosmetic recipes, such as skin lighteners, colors for the face, perfumes, and depilatory formulas. Again, these recipes all rely on alchemical operations and ingredients such as alum and silver. Now, didactic as these recipes may be, and having been created through trial and error, paradoxically and perhaps ironically, no further experimentation is encouraged. As Cortese wrote to her brother, he should follow what she says. The recipes were already perfect and needed no improvement. Of course, this doesn't mean that people didn't experiment, made changes, or improve the recipes to suit their goals. I mean, just think of how we all make changes when making a recipe from a cookbook. You might have budgetary constraints, not have an ingredient at home or a specific tool. You might be allergic to something, or maybe if you're like me, you just don't see the appeal in icing biscuits and you prefer them plain. That all happened to people following Cortese's recipes. It was the same, but with alchemy. And we know that because people left annotations in the margins in these books. They also created their own manuscript recipe collections, copying recipes from various sources, including printed books. This is the case of this manuscript collection, which I found at the Wellcome Library. In this notebook, recipes from both Cortese's and Rosello's books were copied, and sometimes they're attributed to the wrong person, which is fascinating because it again highlights the confusion over authorship and recipes. But it's possible that the main reason why readers weren't encouraged to experiment themselves and to follow recipes to the letter had to do with preserving authority and expertise. Isabella Cortese writes that if you don't obtain the desired result from a recipe, then you have made a mistake. You haven't followed it properly. If you followed the recipes correctly, you would gain access to a world of practical knowledge, all taught by the woman who had herself gathered this collection of recipes. It's very likely that there's much fiction behind this little book, but it's precisely because Isabella Cortese was likely an editorial invention that her book offers us such a rich glimpse into the world of early modern alchemy. If, at a first glance, it may seem that Cortese is telling readers to reject alchemical authorities, a closer look shows us that she's actually replacing one kind of authority with another. Theory associated with men should make room for practice associated with women. This new alchemy, illustrated by Cortese, was open to everyone, including and especially to women. This was an everyday pursuit. Women were invited to engage in alchemy as Cortese's apprentices, using their kitchens as their laboratories. They could make toothpaste, dye their hair, get rid of stains on their clothes, perfume and heal their bodies, taking care of themselves, their families, and their homes. This is a typical recipe. Beauty water for the face. Take lemons and dried beans and combine them in white wine. Add honey, egg, and goat's milk and distill it all together, and this water will make the face beautiful. Not only were these recipes of interest to women, but they would be familiar with the structure of recipes and how they organize information. They would know how to follow recipes without measurements or detailed instructions, using their own experience and knowledge to complement the missing elements of the recipe. These recipes were similar to those in other contemporary books like Alessio Piemontese's, although they were much more alchemical in general. They were also similar to the experiments of alchemists such as Caterina Sforza. So in a way, Cortese's book appears as a sort of patchwork of different traditions, appropriating different identities and associations to create an editorial success, all while making the case for a new alchemy in which women, both simple, illiterate women from the countryside and highly educated women, had mastered this knowledge through direct and practical experience. This was not high alchemy with its esotericism and arcana. It was technical alchemy, used to improve everyday life. It's no wonder, perhaps, that this book would be connected to women, both in terms of who it was attributed to and who its intended readership was. And in the centuries following the publication of this book, many others focused on medicine, cosmetics, and perfumes were attributed to great ladies like Cortese, such as the Queen's Closet opened. I mean, Cortese's book legitimized women's knowledge, and the fact that it was available in print made it widely influential. And just look at this. This is a graphic novel that I found in Italy years ago, inspired by Isabella Cortese. There she is. It's called Bianco come un fiore di gelsomino, or White as a Jasmine, and it tells the story of Isabella having to deal with an increase in ecclesiastical control over alchemy in Rome, the Inquisition. Apparently, it's used to teach history of alchemy in some schools. How cool is that? The people writing and publishing books of secrets clearly recognized a gendered element to expertise and authority in knowledge about alchemy, medicine, cosmetics, and natural philosophy. There was an association between women and a kind of knowledge derived from practical experience, and there was also a growing expectation that knowledge should be shared openly, and not hoarded and kept secret. Just contrast Alessio Piemontese's story, in which he let a person die because he didn't want to share a secret recipe for a remedy, with the many women that appear in anecdotes in these books coming to the rescue of patients and treating them when physicians didn't really know what to do. So they were generously sharing their expertise. The publication of this book also indicates the existence of a female readership interested in learning about all these kinds of recipes. The Secrets of Isabella Cortese is such a fascinating book to think about gender and knowledge in the Renaissance because regardless of there being a real Isabella, women are present in both parts of the equation. They are the producers or makers of knowledge, the authors, as it were, as well as the ones receiving and learning this knowledge too, the readers, the consumers. Plus, much of this knowledge is focused on what was considered the feminine sphere, the home, but also on the female body itself. Recipe books were a European phenomenon, and most of them were written or attributed to men, and men were a big part of their readership. They were central in Renaissance culture, medicine, and alchemy, and these books were used as examples in the debates about ethics, knowledge, authority, and expertise. Of course, Cortese's book is an outlier. It follows trends. After all, publishers were interested in selling as many books as possible. But it also creates trends. A well-traveled woman who decides to share her alchemical knowledge openly, especially with women, that's indeed something new. Women are often left out of history, but in books of secrets, women can be found in dedications, titles, introductions, anecdotes, and recipe headings, with Cortese being, of course, the most well-known example. This illustrates how women were part of the vibrant world of early modern science, alchemy, and medicine. As for Isabella herself, who knows? Maybe other books attributed to a male author were written by women. Maybe this book was written by one or more men. The question of authorship, and I do love a good investigation like this one, turns out to be less interesting than what the book can tell us about gendered attitudes to knowledge and its value. The name Isabella Cortese may well have been an invention, but the deliberate use of a female name associated with courts and experimentation was significant as it boosted the book's authority and appeal. The same can be said about the expectation of a female readership and the focus on a domestic, practical alchemy. This book was widely popular and probably read by many women. It reminds us that women were a big part of the world of science, medicine, and alchemy in the Renaissance, even if they're often left out of how history is told. If you're still with me, thank you so much. I do hope you enjoyed this video and you learned something new. If so, make sure to give it a thumbs up. As always, there's a list of references and recommendations in the description below with links where I could find them. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel and maybe, if you're feeling particularly generous, consider supporting my work on Patreon and helping me keep on making history videos. Your support really matters and it's so appreciated. Thank you and see you next time.